Welcome to this series of webinars organized by the CBIT Platform Project, an initiative hosted by the UNEP-DTU Partnership based in Denmark. The name of today's webinar is How to Increase Capacities in Developing Countries to Support Long-Term Climate Strategies. And we aim to cover not only the technical parts associated with long-term climate strategies, but to have a look into how to implement them properly as well. For this, we will have a panel of two excellent presenters. Nelson Mojarro González from the Mexican Secretariat of Energy and our French fellow colleague at UNEP-DTU, Dr. Christophe Reinikiewicz. But before starting the presentations, I would like to invite Miriam Hinostroza, head of the Program of Low Carbon Development at the UNEP-DTU Partnership, to provide us with a brief introduction to this webinar. Miriam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fernando. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending where you are. I also thank you for joining us to this webinar. So this is the second of the CBIT webinar series that are organized as part of the Knowledge Corner of the CBIT Global Coordination Platform, which is, as Fernando mentioned, hosted and implemented by the UNEP-DTU Partnership. Let me briefly remind us that the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, CBIT, was adopted in the Paris Agreement in order to build institutional and technical capacity, both pre and post-2020, that will support developing country parties upon request. Currently, around 39 countries are in the process of applying to CBIT funds with the main purpose of developing capacities in meeting the enhanced transparency requirements as defined in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement in a timely manner. At the global level, the CBIT programming priorities states the establishment of a global cross-cutting CBIT coordination platform to support the CBIT management. The UN Environment Programme and the UN Development Programme are the GEF agencies in charge of implementing this CBIT Global Coordination Platform, which is a web-based platform and can be accessed at cbitplatform.org altogether. So the aim of this platform is to bring together practitioners from countries and agencies in order to enable coordination, identify needs and gaps in national transparency systems, share lessons learned through regional and global meetings. So far, we have had two meetings, one last year here in Copenhagen, and the second one was in April this year in Berlin. And maybe some of your listeners or participants have attended those meetings. Facilitate access to emerging practices, methodologies, and guidance on transparency of climate action. Enable knowledge and information sharing to all countries, and maximize learning opportunities. So in order to achieve CBIT aims, includes in the work plan the organization of this series of knowledge sharing webinars in support of national planning processes, particularly in the relevant areas of transparency and NDC implementation. So as mentioned by Fernando, for this second webinar, we have selected an overarching topic for national long-term integral planning, which is the long-term climate planning included in the Paris Agreement, particularly in the Article 4, paragraph 19, where countries are invited to formulate and communicate long-term, low greenhouse emission development strategies. And the aim of these strategies is to establish emission reduction goals and trajectories to achieve them by 2015. This implies assessing which capacities the countries have and ultimately what visions the countries want to embrace. Long-term GHG emission development strategies are crucial and provide many opportunities for countries, as you will hear from our two panelists. Overall, the opportunity for mainstreaming climate change into development plans. Beyond this, long-term low emission development strategies is the foundation to comprehensive, inclusive, sustainable, and articulated institutions. Long-term LEDs is the basis for reviewing and adjusting legal and regulatory frameworks supportive of and facilitative of integrated climate change processes and integration to development planning. So currently, in the absence of long-term strategies, countries are also building on existing conditions, as many have advanced bottom-up initiatives. Long-term low-emission development strategies will facilitate the matching of bottom-up initiatives with top-down actions, for example, by using legal instruments to facilitate enforcement, accountability, and complementarity. Long-term, low GHG emissions development strategies will facilitate the overall planning process and not only reporting. Beyond reporting, this is crucial for NDC implementation, for which capacities need to be enhanced at all levels of government structures. So in this webinar, we will try to answer how prepared are the developing countries to prepare and implement long-term low-emission strategies. How can the capacity building initiative for transparency initiative support the developing countries to deliver institutionalized, inclusive, and country-owned long-term strategies? This webinar will explore how examples and lessons learned from similar fields can provide inspiration and practical ideas to build capacity in the context of long-term strategies. So before finalizing, I would like to thank our colleagues from the UN Environment in the Panama office and our colleagues from UNDP for working collaboratively so far. This year we will have 3 webinars. The topics will be related to this year long-term climate strategies. One of the subjects we will support in CBIT projects around the world. So the next webinar will be after the summer vacations in Europe, and the last one before the COP24. So we are encouraging and inviting you to visit the CBIT platform website and other resources available in the website as well, and potentially give us some feedback for making it better, as this is a work in progress. So I am happy to have 2 highly profiled experienced panelists today, as Fernando said, Nelson and Christopher. I really appreciate your participation, and I hope that participants also benefit from your inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miru, for your introduction. Before coming into the presentation of our 2 distinguished speakers, I would like to tell you that we are expecting your questions through the software tool we are using for this webinar. To the right of your screen, you can find it. Please write your question while the 2 speakers are presenting, so we can have the opportunity to collect them and formulate to our presenters in the last part of our webinar. Now, allow me to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Nelson Mojarro Gonzalez. Nelson is the representative in Europe of the Sustainable Energy Fund and the Hydrocarbons Fund. His work focuses on innovation and energy topics. He is also Mexico's main contact point for Mission Innovation, an initiative launched at COP21 together with the Breakthrough Energy Coalition led by Bill Gates. Mission Innovation is formed of 22 countries and the European Commission, who pledged to double their clean energy R+D for the next 5 years. Dr. Mojarro did his doctorate studies in the University of Sussex and holds a Master of Arts in Industry and Innovation Analysis from the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Nelson, you have the next 20 minutes to talk us about your experience in the building of technical capacities related with the energy sector.
Thank you very much. Let's get the screen on. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to begin my talk today, letting you know, inform you about the activities that Mexico has done with respects to building capacity for long-term in Mexico, as well as for human capital development and research. Mexico has undergone a crucial radical reform in the energy sector, and this happened by the end of 2012. And in this reform, it was a major institutional law reform as well in Congress, because Mexico opened its sector for private sector participation, as both for hydrocarbons as well as for power sector. And it also provided an institutional change, strengthening the regulatory bodies within the sector, and creating an operator for the electricity system as well. Throughout the value chain, both for hydrocarbons and for power sector, there were different changes within the stakeholders in terms of their activities and regulation. And this with also long-term goals that Mexico set. For example, we have a national target for generation by 35% of clean energy by 2024. But it also provided a strong interest in this new framework on what the country would do with respect to research, technological development, and training on human capital resources. The main strategy after the energy reform on this matter was the creation of a program, and a strategic program for human capital development of the energy sector, which was published in 2013. And this was done in coordination with the Ministry of Science and Technology, CONACYT, as well as the Ministry of Energy, CENER, but other institutions participated as well. What came out of these targets of this human capital development program? But first of all, with the reform, we expected huge investments coming in the country. Therefore, we have an estimate of how many people would we require to address this challenge. And with the program, you can see that we estimated 135,000 high-level experts and technicians would have to be trained in order to address the challenges of the investments of the reform. We thought that we should take advantage of this reform, focus our efforts on talent development, and as well invest heavily in capacity building in research and innovation. One of the key flagship activities for this program was the creation of a scholarship program, 60,000 scholarships for Mexicans that could undertake programs on energy-related programs, both at technical level and postgraduate level. How would we going to fund these activities, the 60,000 scholarships plus other activities that we'll speak today about? Well, Mexico has two funds to support these activities, and the resources that come from the oil rent, a small percentage, 0.0065, goes to these funds, but the majority of the distribution goes to Hydrocarbons Fund, and then the rest, 15%, goes to and the rest goes for Sustainability Energy Fund. So we have two funds that are supported from the oil rent, and this is how we distribute it for these activities. So these funds are created specifically to support talent development, capacity building, R&D, and energy education. Hydrocarbons funds will look to fund activities related to exploration, extraction, petrochemistry, and industrial transformation. But today, I'll mainly speak about the activities related to Sustainable Energy Fund, Clean Energy Fund, on energy efficiency, clean technologies, renewable energy, and portfolio diversification for clean energy. These are the areas that can be supported with the Sustainability Fund. For this fund, we have three main activities that we want to fund: human capital development, development of high quality people for production and services, knowledge creation, capacity building or scientific, technological, and innovation support for this activity, and R&D as well. Throughout these three general pillars, we have a strategy to support our activities internationally with international cooperation. So as the energy reform unfolded, we saw a large increase of investment. To date, we know that there has been about $100 billion investment after the energy reform on the energy sector in Mexico. But the way we wanted to address this challenge was by creating a vision for this sector to be attractive, but also to build capacity within Mexico. So we developed 4 strategic pillars. One, coordination and information for timely decision making. We needed to know what was the talent gap, what was the information required. As you know, we were just looking at the energy sector, but we also had to coordinate a lot of the activities and knowledge with other ministries like the education and science and technology to know how many programs were in the country already running with the right level and the numbers that of personnel trained within the country. We also saw that we needed to support trained personnel on the operational side. And as well, we wanted to support talent that could generate knowledge and provide products and services of high quality. And lastly, as well, we wanted to support scientific activities, but also activities within the country for elementary and secondary students in Mexico. We developed some action streams for each of these activities, and I would focus on the ones that postgraduate and on science R&D. But there were the creation of an understanding on the accredited programs already in Mexico at technological, technical, and professional level, and the 4 postgraduate scholarships as well. The 60,000 scholarships that I mentioned in the first slides were divided 80% for postgraduate, 80% for technical and vocational trainings, and 20% for scholarships on postgraduate. So about 12,000 scholarships for masters and PhDs, as well as activities for postdocs. We also had a strategy to communicate what was going on, what was the program, what was the current and future talent development gaps. We published online tools for people that were interested to know what was the planning for both the hydrocarbons as well as the power sector. It was available online to understand what would we need to develop further activities in order to support all the areas within the energy sector. We had a program for lectures of international speakers coming every month to Mexico to deliver interesting lecture at universities and different forums. And we also had TV ads and other communication sources providing information of the big challenge and what we needed to train as many people on which areas. So with this fund, I'm focusing the talk on the Sustainability Energy Fund. Basically, it is to support activities on science and research, adoption, innovation, assimilation, and technological development on the areas that were mentioned before. Basically, we want to increase our national capabilities in this energy sector, foster research and technological development, and as well develop closer links between the scientific and academic community with industry. What you see now on the slide is a mapping of our activities where we devoted most of our funding, most of our efforts was related to talent and capacity support, the human capital formation. You see it on the lower screen, number 1, with the 60,000 scholarship program. We also develop calls for infrastructure strengthening for universities or local institutions that would want to have laboratories or other type of infrastructure and consolidate their strengths within this sector in order to train more personnel of within the country. But we also provided funding for knowledge consolidation and linkages with industry, and this is where the Mexican Innovation Centers come in, as well as some of our international participation. And then we had a lot of international support and engagement in order to provide funding for prizes and projects. In order to give you an example of the activity that we have done, basically, I just provided you with a table here on the postdoc opportunity that we provided and the postgraduate. So we were able to fund Mexicans doing master's and PhD programs, either in Mexico or at the best universities in the world, universities with excellence of programs on energy. At the moment, we have at any given time about 2,000 Mexican students across the globe studying energy programs, but we also had a program for postdoc. And this was an ambitious program in order to attract our best researchers around the world, support them for their postdoc activities, whatever this could be undertaken. And then if they desire to come back to Mexico, to provide them a grant of up to $250,000 to come to Mexico and to further continue their research in any university that they wanted to do so. There was a big focus in this strengthening part of capacity building on the scholarships, on working with elementary schools, secondary schools, also with clubs of science, we call it. And then clubs of science, we provided support for graduates at different universities to come and speak about science to different elementary, secondary schools. But we also generated a very strong shift in our strategy, where we decided to not fund just for projects, but to devote our funding to cluster type Mexican innovation centers. And these centers will be virtual centers, not physical, and they would be awarded a 4-year funding for our activities where we saw an interest in supporting. So before, we had different institutions applying for resources on projects, and after the change of strategy, when we created the CEMIES, the Mexican Innovation Centers, they had to come in a consortia and develop strategic projects that could help not only on training human capital, on developing infrastructure, but also on providing support for research. So at the moment, we have 7 innovation centers, 1 for solar, 1 for ocean, 1 for bioenergy, geothermal, and wind energy. And we just announced the winners of the 2 most recent CEMIEs, the Smart Grid CEMIE and the Carbon Capture Utilization Storage Center. These have started to come into operation at different times, and you'll see a little bit of a description for each of them. So in this case, the geothermal energy is being led by, all of them are led by different institutions, but you can see they have members of industry and academia. In the case of geothermal, there's 22 members, and is led by CICESE up in the north in Mexico. In the case of CEMIE Solar, it's 43 members that participate in the consortia, 43 institutions and industry partners, and the strategic research lines are described or listed in the slide, and those are the ones that are being led by UNAM through the Renewable Energy Institute. Wind has 32 members. It's being led by INEL, which is our National Institute of Electricity of Clean Energy. And it works closely with industry as well as with other research centers in Mexico. For bioenergy, we decided a different strategy. We created a CBIT center for bioenergy, but we also had clusters within this. So biogas, bioalcohol, solid fuels, biojet fuel, and biodiesel are all led with different institutions in Mexico. We thought with the diversification interest to also support activities on ocean energy, and this is being led by UNAM, and there is a strong case for supporting ocean energy in Mexico due to our coastal resources. In terms of smart grids, as I said, this is we just announced the winner in June, and has been won by INEL, and they will be leading an international consortia on smart grids, as well as with the carbon capture, utilization, and storage. What you have on the graph here is more or less a distribution of the amount of resources invested in them. So we have that geothermal has had a strong investment. These are government-funded programs for 4 years in all of the cases. And carbon capture, utilization, storage on the right-hand side, it's an $80 million investment with some of the money provided by the World Bank, with the majority by the Mexican government. With respects to international cooperation, I would like to let you know some of the activities that we have undertaken. When we launched our strategic human capital development program for the energy sector, and we started supporting through calls, not only infrastructure, but also calls for research, we understood that we needed to develop our capacities by engaging with international actors, and we developed an international strategy that, together with other governments, we fostered to, or we look to create funding mechanisms, joint funding mechanisms to support our activities and to provide further opportunities for our Mexicans abroad, but or more importantly for our nationals working with international partners. So we developed our first call with Horizon 2020, the largest funding European program for science and technology. We also participate in mission innovation. What with the UK government, we also worked through the Newton Fund on joint match funding, and we thought that linking well with the private sector was going to be a key component as well in also developing our own private sector in Mexico. So we work closely with the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. Mexico, since February this year, also became the 30th member of the International Energy Agency, and this is where we have started to develop also further networks for our Mexican institutions. In the case of the activities done in Europe for our international program of activities, I will talk to you today about our co-funding mechanisms, what are main activities within mission innovation, what has happened in terms of our scholarships in Europe, and a little bit detail on the lecture series of the future of energy in Mexico lecture series. So we created match funding mechanisms on clean energy R&D through the European Commission call. As I said, it's a joint call of 20 million euros on geothermal. This is on top of the funding that has been awarded already for the SEMIES. And also develop UK-Mexico energy calls, 5 million for businesses to work with UK businesses to work with international institutions, in this case Mexico, with universities developing joint R&D projects, as well as for young researchers to work together on different research projects with the UK through the Institutional Links program, and researchers working on mission innovation topics. Mission innovation, as mentioned in the introduction, is for governments, 24 now, governments decided to pledge to double their clean energy R&D investment. This was launched at COP21 in Paris. And this is for us a major platform for engagement and an alignment of international goals and activities with our own national agenda. And it's the main vehicle to comply with this commitment on behalf of Mexico have been the Mexican Centers for Energy Innovation, although we have developed further goals aligned to mission innovation challenges. So this is a unique moment in time. The doubling was for 5 years. COP21 governments decided to double their investment. As you can see in the map, most of the major countries have participated or are part of mission innovation. 80% of government investment in clean energy R&D are held by these countries participating. And the ambition is to go from $15 billion to $30 billion of clean energy R&D investment. Mission Innovation has announced now 8 innovation challenges, very recently number 8 on hydrogen. But what you can see in red, smart grids, carbon capture, and clean energy materials are the ones that Mexico has devoted resources for joint international cooperation, and Mexico co-leads 2 of these 3 of these challenges, the one on materials and with CCUS. We were a founding member. As I said, we work closely with the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, but we also become very active in the initiative, also co-leading the business and investor engagement and coordinating the activities with the World Economic Forum. With respect to our scholarship program, most of our students are undertaking programs in Europe, in UK or EU universities. Most of them are doing master's program, but also we have a good number of PhDs. We develop joint programs with the UK, where they sponsor 50% of the cost for master's program to their Chevening initiative, and CENER CONACYT sponsors half as well. And with them, with Europe, we also have the postdoc program, as mentioned before. Each month, we have in Mexico a lecture series, but we also have organized workshops with different European universities in Mexico on topics that we aim to support. For example, when we were about to design and launch the Smart Grids SEMIE, we prepared a workshop with international participants, same for CCUS and Bioenergy, and we have been closely working with the International Energy Agency. Past speakers of the international series of lectures have been, as you can see, very distinguished speakers, Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, Lord Nicholas Stern from LSE, as well as different from the IEA and the UK. So we're open for international cooperation on clean energy R&D, match funding mechanisms in order to adequate our national institutions and our national researchers to work and develop their capabilities and their research with international participants. So 25 million euros has been attracted through match funding within these 2 years. The Mission Innovation Challenges, we have different institutions participating in them, and we work closely with the World Economic Forum, and we held also for a workshop back in 2017 to develop engagement of the private sector with the clean energy development. Also to point out that very recently we have launched the largest ever cooperation, international cooperation of Mexico with respects to research and training. We have done this in line with our budget. As you have seen in the first slides, the majority is for hydrocarbons, but we also have some funding for sustainability topics. And in the case of sustainability, we have supported training programs. We have just launched a call of about 5 million pounds to develop training capacity in Mexico with selected partners overseas, in this case, 3 UK universities, Imperial College for training and capacity, and for research technological development with Imperial College, UCL, and LSE. So for training, the theme is sustainability, research-led innovation, and entrepreneurship in the Mexican university sector. So helping universities develop their research with industry, but also provide the capabilities for entrepreneurship within our system. And with respect to research, we're focusing to complement our own activities on the SMEs by also developing funding for joint projects on large scale solar concentrations with Imperial College, but with UCL, different types of modeling, energy innovation, smart sustainable cities, intelligent and efficient energy and sustainable buildings, and with LSE, but after the Paris Agreement, how would Mexico would need to work with respect to their energy model for a transition to a low carbon economy. For opportunities of collaboration, as mentioned, we have the scholarships that are undergone now. They're still running. The postdoc program, the partnerships with selected partners. We started this with Canada, but also with UK and France for the hydrocarbons, and sustainability for the UK, as mentioned. We have a large investment on the SMEs, nearly $200 million now. And with our strategic alliances we have been developing, as mentioned before. All in this 2018, we hope these projects to materialize with the strategic alliance called on hydrocarbons. It's a 60 million pound, and that includes different topics on training and different topics on research, most of them on developing joint masters program in the areas that we saw that we identified the gaps and that we needed a long-term planning for the energy sector. And with respect to the sustainability call, activities where we knew that we needed to develop further research on based on international cooperation and capacities overseas. And we are keeping our activities with respect to public-private cooperation with the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, but also dedicating funding for calls on different challenges of mission innovation with other countries like Canada on biojet fuel, smart grids through the challenge of smart grids with different countries participating, Italy and India mainly, and with carbon capture, utilization, storage, our funding through the consortia that have initially and developed the project and has won by INEL, the National Institute for Clean Energy. Now we also change our structure and we're also able to fund firms. Before it was just universities and research institutions for projects related to innovation and R&D in order to promote further public-private interactions and partnerships. This is just an example of more details of the workshops and activities of the high-level keynote speakers. And all of these activities have been reported year by year. Where have we been spending the money? What are the activities? How we have impacted? How many people have we trained on which areas? How long are they for? Which projects have been funded? And we do an annual report. It's available online. But each week as well, we have a bi-monthly digital magazine for relevant news, articles, and collaboration opportunities for the future. Well, with this, I would like to finish the talk. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, for your presentation. We'll keep the question for Nelson to the last part of this webinar. But I would like to say that for people like us coming from the climate or the environmental world, listening to the projects in the energy field you mentioned in your presentation, I think gives us several ideas on how to implement better capacity building projects in the climate area. Please remember that we have a question system in the software open now for your questions. Please write your questions. We have received some so far. And write your question as soon as possible so we can have the opportunity to collect them and formulate them in the last part of our webinar. Our second and last presenter is Dr. Christoph Wenikiewicz. As I mentioned before, Christoph is a senior advisor at our UNEP-TTU partnership. Christoph is an economist and climate finance expert. He has acquired more than 15 years of experience in analyzing, designing, and attracting finance to green growth strategies and low-emission development strategies in different projects. He has an interest in the broad transformational implications induced by a low-carbon agenda for job creation, fiscal policies, and national budget. Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon for all participants. Thank you, Nelson, for this inspiring presentation. I will try to bring some insights on the needs expressed by different countries in the recent CBIT projects, whether they are at the proposal stage or already approved. And I will have three main points, basically on to bring back this discussion on capacity and capabilities for the long-term low GHG development strategies, come back on some capacity needs expressed in the CBIT proposals and also the other exercises, and the last point, which is bringing many open questions on how to evaluate and maximize the capacity building process. So on the first point, mainly to recall the increased focus on the capacity building after the Paris Agreement through the Paris Committee agenda of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, and also a growing momentum of the South-South collaboration that we can witness where different countries want to exchange experiences at the national and subnational level. There are many funding possibilities and ongoing activities. First of all, of course, the CBIT funds from the GEF, but also previously the low emission capacity building Leg B projects funded by UNDP. The recent PASTI project with Japan, which is also looking at innovation, a new CDKN focus on capacity building and knowledge at the national level, just launched 1 week ago, and the evolution of the NDC support in various countries. All this funding has also a vibrant community of academics and emerging communities of practice where we can, which we can engage. And to recall, one of the imperatives that the Plan CC Peru was bringing when they were working on the MAPS project is that this transformational agenda of the long-term strategy is not only it's a country's economy progress to a low-carbon development pathways. It's a complex process that requires people with many different skills, visionaries, leaders, researchers, communicators, organizers, financiers, and implementers. So we won't bring any one-size-fits-all solution today, but we wanted to bring back some of the main needs that we found in the different proposals. First of all, there are capacity needs to develop the long-term strategies, but also to implement them, and those are different. And the process of change involved in capacity building is, as recalled by OECD or UNDP, is for competencies. So that includes the skills and the abilities of the individuals, but there is also something which is defined as the capabilities, so the collective ability of a group or a system to do something either inside or outside of the system. And that's this capability notion, plus the resources, the volume, the replicability, and the scale would bring equals the capacity, so the overall ability of the organization or the system to create values, and that's a definition that CDKN was using for its work and engaging the different countries. So it's not only enabling change at the individual level, but also at the organizational level and at the systems level. That's what we wanted to stress on, building on the work that has been done by Jeff for several years now. And the implementation challenge is also bringing or asking for new capacities and new capabilities. We would suggest to build on the institutional capacities that are needed for the NDC implementation, as was published in a recent guidance from UNEP-DTU this year, and also questioning the two following questions: which organizations do we need, and what role will they play for this implementation? And we had a very good example for the energy sector. But of course, we need low carbon development pathways in the agriculture sector, in the transport, in the way urban cities are built, and the relation between rural and urban. So there is a big, this question is not easy to answer. And also the instruments and the role for the public and the private sector to drive this transformational agenda. And moreover, as a society that wants to build its to raise its educational level and drive this innovation journey, what kind of capabilities are needed in a 2050 carbon constrained world, where the basic functions of how we move, we have shelter or eat, will or should change radically. So building on those questions, we try to identify the needs and the challenges in the different CBIT proposals. And many of the countries were also reaffirming that the process and the learning during the low emission development strategy is as important as the target. And that's something that was already found during the MAPS project in different Latin American countries and South Africa. A strong emphasis is on the stakeholder engagement from the different sectors and different groups. And for example, the 2050 Pathways platform we are quoting them now, LTS are the result of a process with broad stakeholders engagement, and it avoids the risk of a technocratic quantification exercise produced in a political vacuum. I think the sentence is quite self-explanatory. The question now is more which type of institutional change, whether it's which type of platform would enable the diversity of views in a non-conflictual setting to allow to describe the different pathways to a target in 2035 or 2050. There is also a need to enable the demonstration of what is possible at a also micro or meso level and make it visible and communicate on it. And there is a need when also for the implementation to have a strengthened capacity in climate policy governance to align the different key policy levers with the climate policy objectives. And to justify also, or to bring some background from this on the stakeholder engagement is what South-South-North and the MAPS program were identifying earlier on, was that the legitimacy, the relevance, and the credibility of the stakeholder engagement are the cornerstones in the process. When it comes to the different CBIT proposals submitted to Jeff, There are more than 20% of those proposals that are looking at low emission strategies, not only at the national level, but also at the subnational level, and building on regional or cities that our first movers are, and that are bringing new targets, whether they are carbon neutral or reducing emissions domestically. The contribution by the private sector, not only big multinationals, but also national companies, cooperatives, and the new business model brought by startups is also valuable. And more than 100 companies are already engaged in the Science-Based Targets Initiative, so bringing some inputs for low carbon development strategies. And we could also figure out in the different proposals that there is a need to understand and bring critical debates on the rates and the diffusion of new potentially disruptive technologies, whether they are smart grids or other types of renewable energies. So that's more on the hard side, but on the soft side and the different values that are brought, that are changing, whether it can be a change in the low carbon lifestyles, in diets, in mobility, the role of the prosumers, and the role of the digitalization of the economy. So that's one of the aspects that is also a focus in the different CBIT proposals. The last aspect, which is also very important to help the discussion with the other ministries, including economy and finance, is that the countries are asking for to build capacity on impact assessment of those long-term energy and low carbon strategies in terms of implication on growth, of sectoral dynamics, the role of the different subsectors in the economy, as well as structural changes, job creation and distribution impacts. So to conclude with some questions and also take the questions from the participants, one of the first one is how to allow for this, for different competing visions and diversities of views. What spaces are necessary for dialogues, decision making, and also monitoring and evaluation. A question that was brought at the recent CGX debate brought by the OECD. How can we evaluate the efficiency and enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of the capacity building initiatives? And can we retain capacity created? That's one of the challenge also, and I think Nelson brought some interesting inputs. And lastly, the role of the technology development and transfer and the joint research funds to help build those and implement those long-term strategies. So that's now open, I think, for discussions. I give you back the floor, Fernando.
Thank you, Christophe, and for your presentation. As you already mentioned, now we are getting into the last part of the webinar, answering your questions. With regards to availability of the presentations, that was one of the questions. We will create a link at the CBIT platform website, so you can access the materials of this webinar. The URL of our platform is www.cbitplatform.org. We managed to collect several questions from you, and some are very similar, so I decided to cluster some of them. And for Nelson, we received questions in two areas. One, Nelson, you are there, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Well, from the demand side, I mean, Mexican students were more interested in fossil or in non-fossil technologies. And what do you consider is the reason for that? This is the first one. And the second is, what is the connection of the program you mentioned with the labor market and the opportunities to to students to carry on working in Mexico, particularly with the skills they received.
Okay, so yeah, so thank you for the questions. To inform you that with respect to the demand that we have received for from the students, it's about 3-to-1, the ratio. So it's 3 times more demanding programs for sustainability. Our students are looking to undertake more programs on sustainability than on fossil-related programs. So less on hydrocarbons, 3 times more on sustainability. We're talking about the new generation, students just finishing university, and when they see there is an opportunity to work. I did mention that we opened both of our sector for private sector participation, and although there has been significant investments, about $80 billion on the hydrocarbon sector starting now from the coming years, big companies, Shell, oil, BP, all these oil activities plus others, we have seen a stronger interest on students focusing on renewable energy, master's program, different activities related to low carbon transition. There's a stronger interest on behalf of the students. Regarding the second question on how does that transfer into job opportunities, well, basically it's a connection. We saw the creation of the program as a response to what was expected in terms of investment and in terms of job opportunities. So what we're actually trying to fund and sponsor are activities that will bring our Mexican nationals the skill sets needed to have better jobs within the sector. As we have seen, not only hydrocarbons, but in the case of the power sector, it has been a highly successful energy reform because Mexico has had now 3 auctions for renewable energy, setting world record prices and tremendous investment in the sector, now going to $8 billion. So what we hope is that we can accompany this flow of resources with enough students with the right levels of skills that the industry will be demanding. And we have set up an observatory of talent together with industry in order to align very well the programs that students are undertaking, but also the ones that we are funding through the strengthening of our infrastructure within Mexico. So more programs, more master programs, more technical programs developed in Mexico that are very well aligned with the industry. So these are the answers. Hope I made it clear.
Thank you, Nelson. Well, a very impressive project you presented us today, indeed. I have a question for Christoph. Christoph, you consider that these long-term strategies can be used to draw financial support for implementation of NDCs or for technical needs in countries? What would be your opinion?
It's true that the first long-term strategies that were designed, for example, in Europe, were when the DG Research was asking those projections, that was to help them decide also what were the most promising technologies and where they should put the R&D money. So that's in this sense, the LTS process is a way to identify and to the technologies that could be needed, and not forget the niches or the technologies where we are not very there are lots of uncertainties. There is a missing link, or for the moment, between the technology needs assessment and the NDC and the long-term strategies, but that's something that people are aware of, and more and more publications and focus is brought on the link between the TNA and the technological needs and the NDC and the long-term strategies. There is moreover a link that is interesting to make, and I think Mexico highlighted that between CONACYT and CENER, is the link between the Ministry of Research or Science and Innovation and the different other ministries to define what should be or what could be national systems of innovation or a transformative transformational innovation policy. And that's some of the countries are engaged in that, for example, South Africa or Colombia, with different EU partners and other countries.
Thanks, Christophe. We are just in time to close this webinar. We want to express our sincere gratitude to you for coming and getting informed by us. Remember that our next webinar about long-term climate strategies will be aired in the month of September. Thank you very much for joining.